And hello, hi, it's Kathy Frey here, and welcome to this week's IMCO webinar, our Maternity Natural Health webinar. And let me introduce to you today Nolene Levinson. Say hello, Nolene.
Hi. So happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely rapt to have Nolene here. We have just worked out that we're both in the same country. We hadn't actually realised that. Yeah, and we've got we've just been in the green room with a couple of quite similar stories. Our kids are similar ages, and we both lived in the big city, big smoke of Auckland, which is the largest city in New Zealand. And not that long ago, similar time ago, both have left because our older kids have left home. So I went north and she went south, east, and it's really funny. But anyway, look, great to have you all along here today. And this topic is particularly close to my heart, I have to say, of talking about homeopathy and its use particularly with babies, and that just leads into their childhood as well. So just a little bit of background on Nolene. She's been working in the health industry for 35 years and is a qualified sound therapist. So that'd be interesting to hear about, and a brain profiler, and a microcurrent therapist. These are all such interesting terms to hear about. And of course, Alexander technique, and which it would be good to explain that to some of us as well. And so fascinating here, an acute prescribing homeopath, because homeopathy is so useful for chronic conditions and acute conditions. Yeah, so we're going to be explaining more about that today. And the format today is that we will be basically just having a little bit of a chit chat, and we've got some really good things that we want to be going over for you all today. So Nolene, let me hand over to you, and please sort of reintroduce yourself. Just a reminder to everybody, we'd love you to go into the chat and let us know whereabouts you are in the world and your role. It's always good for us to know. And if you've got any questions today for Nolene, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A section, which usually is a button at the bottom of your screen. So Nolene, please reintroduce yourself to us all and tell us a little bit more about what you'll be talking about today.
Well, thanks. So yes, I actually, as you say, I have a number of hats that I have worn over the years, and it's a good place to come from, because what I normally do is I amalgamate all the things that I know. You know, when I'm treating somebody, I've got a huge base of knowledge that I can draw from. But the homeopathy was my passion from a very long time ago. Before my children were born, I decided I would bring up my children using homeopathy. And I had grown up on antibiotics because my parents were in the medical model, very much so. My father was a doctor. And for every little sniffle, I got another antibiotic. So I think I was on an antibiotic almost every other day. And by the time I got to the age of 24, I think I had an immune disease, which today they'd call AIDS, an autoimmune disease, because I had no immune system left. I had really destroyed my immune system so dramatically through having allergies. I'd eaten all the wrong foods. I had been taking cortisone for years for the allergies. It just was a medical misadventure. And it took me years and years to recover. But the journey of recovering was part of my education, because I went from homeopath to homeopath and slowly but surely began to understand how this could help me. And it led me on quite an incredible journey. I found the most fabulous homeopaths. And I really knew that this is how I was going to bring up my own children. And the very first thing I did was I went to a first aid course using homeopathy. And this is the very thing I'm now teaching. But this was my introduction to how to use homeopathy, because if you are a mother and you are going to use it, you do need to know what you're doing. And And that was the most valuable course, because it, first of all, it gave me an introduction to what is homeopathy, how it works, and how am I going to use it with my children. But it really was my first step into using homeopathy as a mother. And that was just the most valuable thing. And then, of course, I went on to study homeopathy, and then I studied homeotoxicology. And I just adored this section because it was such an important thing. I was treating children in my sound therapy who had been damaged either emotionally or through some kind of toxicity. And it was such a useful thing to be able to draw on that knowledge. But then over the years, I used homeopathy absolutely exclusively with my children. My son has had one antibiotic in his life, and that was at 6 months old, and that was really because he was going to die if I didn't do that. And so he has never had antibiotics since then. My daughter also.
I might come in at this, but we were discussing in the green room, chatting before we went live. But the topic that Nolene is going to guide you through today is one that's also very close to my heart. And our children are now, they're just changing ages, but they're now sort of becoming 21, 23, 25. So that's collectively nearly around 70 years of existence. And they too have never had antibiotics for illness. And I was just like Nolene. I used homeopathy as the first cab off the rank. I always took on the idea that that's the first thing I'll use. I was quite prepared to use other things if that didn't work, but hey presto, every single time that it would work. And yeah, I was just telling her a story that when our eldest was 18, he did get a dog bite in a supermarket car park when he was pushing trolleys working for the supermarket. And that was the first time that he actually had some antibiotics, because I was like, oh my goodness, a dog bite. We don't know what's in that. Yeah, let's do it. This was not from disease. Yes. And of course, the doctor at the emergency department was like, well, are you allergic to any antibiotics? And we're like, well, we don't know. He's never had any. And, you know, the look on the doctor's face of this 18-year-old that's never had antibiotics.
Yeah.
You know, and looking at me like, you know, did you give any kind of care to this child? And of course now they're a lot older, so there's absolutely no convincing me as a mother, having gone through that with our babies, is how incredibly effective homeopathy is, especially on those you know, really virginal young immune systems that have not been thrashed through, you know, huge childhoods of antibiotics. Because again, I was very similar to you, Nolene, with that my sort of constitutional weakness growing up was bronchitis, and I just can't, the amount of antibiotics I got fed on that one. And yeah, it was not until I was in, yeah, around 28, 30 that I finally managed to sort of clean my system out, and finally had a chest cold with a cough that I managed to actually get through without needing antibiotics. Like, my body fought it for the first time in its life. And I've never had it since. So whereas, you know, before that it was recurrent. And yeah, so amazing, incredibly effective items. But I just wanted to throw that in there with credibility for you, what you was talking about. In fact, I've got another story I might tell a little bit towards the end if we have time. So like, tell us, Nolene, when you say that you are an acute prescriber, that's quite specialized within homeopathy, and the common thing would be that when somebody has a condition, they go and see a classical homeopath, and they sort of go through all their constitution, and they find out, what their weaknesses. But I find that fantastic that you're sort of almost specialized in the area. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that particularly assists with?
Absolutely. And so that's such an important topic, because there are different homeopaths, and they're all brilliant, but then they each do something quite different. And so your classical homeopath is a chronic homeopath. We're looking at illnesses that have been with you a long time, even generational illnesses. And so that's really important, because they're really not good at the acute stuff. And your acute stuff, so your colds and your coughs and your flus and your sneezes and your allergies. And in babies, we're looking at acute stuff that is not really about illness so much, but we're looking at things that are going to happen anyway. Babies are going to teeth whether we like it or not. Okay.
Yes.
And with teething comes fevers and diarrhea and all kinds of things. The baby's not sick. Doesn't need antibiotics. It doesn't need Panadol for the fever. You have to learn how to cope with that fever, because the baby's not ill. The body is actually growing, and you need to support it while it goes through that process. And that's really what teaching this is about. But that's what an acute homeopath looks at. And actually, I know this is going to sound odd, but it's harder to be an acute homeopath than it is a chronic homeopath. Because a chronic homeopath gives you one remedy and says, cheers, see you in a month. One remedy. Whereas an acute homeopath could give you one remedy every hour.
Yes, because you're talking about the symptoms that keep changing.
Exactly right.
As your body progresses through. Yes.
Exactly right. Which is why it's so important that if you're going to use homeopathy for acute, is that you have a kit at home. Yeah. Because you phone your homeopath in your home, and you can tell your homeopath what's happening. And then I can say, right, what you actually need is start with pulsatilla and let me know how it goes. Give it a few doses and tell me, phone me, or text me.
And you're absolutely right that you do need your kit at home, and that's exactly what I had as well. I had a little directory book or a little sort of homeopathic encyclopedia as such, and I had my kit. And it went everywhere with us. If we were not at home, it came with us.
Yes.
Because that's when you're on holiday, is bound to be when something starts happening.
Always. I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, for sunstroke, so you take your kids to the sea, and now they've got sunstroke in the middle of the night. Homeopathy works in an instant. Or the child has been exposed to cold, dry wind. And if you can just take a dose of aconite, once you get home, you already stop the whole thing from happening. Yeah. So my mother used to think I was a lunatic, because the child would sneeze once and I would immediately be onto it, because no, you're neurotic. I'm like, no, that's how you use homeopathy. Yeah. You don't wait until the child is hawking up green mucus to start. Yes. You get it right at the beginning. And so I use this book, and I brought it out so that you could have a look at it. This is not the book that I used as a Bible. It's called Homeopathy for Mother and Baby by Marinda Castro. And this is the book I provide to all my students who learn with me. And it really becomes your Bible. She's written it so well and so easily that you can actually use it. So it really is important to learn how to use homeopathy. And as I said, to have your kit available, because in the middle of the night, your baby's got a fever, you can't rush out to buy anything at that point. You need to have your remedies next to you so that you can look at the symptoms and go, right, this is what it is. Here it is. And of course, I teach other things as well, because fevers need to be managed, and you want to keep the heat away from the head. So you've got to have ideas of how to pull that heat out of the head. So we wrap the ankles and wrists in a cold wrap. Water and vinegar usually is the best, with on a cloth. Do you use another word for cloth here? I can't remember. But I use face cloths and wrap the ankles with it. And flannel. Okay, thank you. And it draws the heat out of the head. And the heat in the head is dangerous, but heat in the body is not dangerous. The body is getting hot in order to fight whatever is going on.
Exactly. And that's the whole purpose of the fever, is to slow down the replication, the multiplication of the bacteria or the virus. The heat has a purpose. And yes, we don't want a child to have a fever so high that they have a febrile seizure. Oh no, we don't. But a mild fever is fantastic for helping the body to recover.
Exactly.
And even just learning that is a basic of going, so a normal temperature is 36.5 to 37.5, and my child is 37.9. Well, that's a very mild fever. I wouldn't give anything for that. Meaning paracetamol or ibuprofen. You wouldn't give that to a 37.9 fever, because it's not a high fever.
Yeah.
It's not so just understanding that sort of basics, isn't it? So tell me about maybe do you want to just do a quick overview about how homeopathy remedies even work for those that are not familiar with the vibrational tinctures?
Sure. Okay, so we make our remedies either from plants or from minerals or from animals. There are a whole lot of terminology that you don't really need to know, but the point is that they grind up the flower or the animal. So, for example, we use a flower called pulsatilla, and we grind it up, and then we put it in alcohol. And what we do is it's called infinitesimal dose, and we basically dilute that down to make your remedy. And in fact, the more diluted it is, the more powerful it becomes. And then what we then potentize it. And potentizing it is actually it used to be just knocking it on your hand, and then there was knocking it on a Bible, and then now there are machines that potentize our remedies. But what they thought was happening is that when Hahnemann, who was the doctor who organized all of this homeopathic stuff, when he was giving remedies at home, he found that they weren't as powerful as the remedies that he put in his bag and went on his horse and cart off to the patient. And so he then realized that the movement of that remedy, that sort of rocking backwards and forwards, actually potentized and made his remedy more strong. So that's where they say that's where the potentizing came about. But what's interesting is that the homeopathy doesn't fail you. It's getting the right homeopathy that's important, because homeopathy doesn't treat an illness. It treats the picture of how we present the illness. So you and I get a cold, and I will sneeze my head off. You will get a cough. We might have even gotten the very same pathogen, but our bodies are presenting it differently. And what we want to treat is how we're presenting it. So I will take a remedy that is eyes streaming, nose running, red, sore, corrosion around the nostrils, and the lips are cracked. There's a specific remedy that fits that picture. You have got the exact same cold, but you're coughing, and you're coughing this wet, mucousy cough. That's a very specific remedy. So we don't treat illnesses, we treat the picture. And exactly the same with children. Exactly the same. They can all be teething, but they could be doing different things. So one baby's teething and they get one red spot on the cheek. That's a remedy, believe it or not. The things that are odd and peculiar that you see is happening to your child, that's that. Another very common thing is colic. How many babies do you know have colic? All of them. So, but some of them pull down and pull their legs towards them. Others arch backwards when they're crying. Two different remedies. So if you can learn.
This is so much part of the issue, in a way, that why homeopathy is in some places still regarded, unfortunately, as a pseudo medicine, which is just insane, because it is so incredibly popular and prescribed in so many other countries, particularly Europe and particularly India. The British Raj brought homeopathy really to India, and India completely embraced it. But in the UK and in Europe, there's huge percentages of general community medical doctors who use homeopathy as routinely as part of their prescription. And somehow in countries, particularly I think Australia and the US, there is just such a sort of turn their nose up at it that it's pseudoscience. But and you know, one of the things that people will complain about is they'll say, you know, there's not good science and robust research that this is a good cough remedy. Well, you know, when you've got 50 different kinds of coughs with 50 different remedies, I mean, how do you do a double-blind trial on that? You know, it's just not possible. You know, if you've got 50 people with 50 coughs, well, they're going to have 50 different remedies potentially. So how can we prove? Yeah, so it does get very tricky. And then on top of that, because we're talking about really a vibrational tincture that has no molecular structure left in it of the original contributing item that was created, that, you know, again, science will go, well, it's there's nothing there, so how can it work? But that's where hopefully, you know, over the next few decades or a couple of decades, you know, we will get into the situation where modern medicine starts to realize that even though they can't see it and they don't understand it and they can't quite prove it yet, there's no doubt that it works. And I mean, a good example of that in recent times, I think around the world, has been acupuncture. And, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, particularly in the West, acupuncture was just seen as crazy stuff. You know, like these Chinese with needles and meridian energy lines are like, what is that about? You know, and now it has been adopted a lot by mainstream modern medicine, and that's fantastic because they realize they don't completely understand it, but it is effective. And and certainly within pregnancy and labor and birth, you know, that pushing stage in labor and childbirth, oh man, you know, as a midwife, boy, you know, if we use homeopathy a lot in that situation. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if you're speaking to practically any self-employed midwife who caseloads and, you know, and has a very low level of cesarean rates within her, you know, her statistics, chances are you look in her birthing bag and there's a whole heap of homeopathy in there. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a real first go-to tool in that situation. So, but we digress. Let's go into the first aid aspect of, you know, parenting a newborn, or and for our health professionals, you know, that are guiding our woman, you know, particularly in that first 6 weeks, which is always, you know, so mind-blowing, but all that time of infant, you know, of having a baby, there may be some real go-to remedies that you would recommend everybody has in their first aid kit.
Oh, absolutely. Initially, the first thing you want to do when you've had your baby, and it's regardless of whether it was a Caesar or whether it was a natural birth, you want to be able to take arnica, calendula, hypericum, and if not arnica, then Bellis perennis, because those remedies are your healing remedies. They will get your healing going and really fast. So the Bellis perennis is particularly good because it's about deep tissue, particularly if you've had a natural birth. It's almost like all of that deep tissue area is bruised, and it's for that bruising of that deep tissue area in the uterus. So that works a charm. And calendula is just the most marvelous healing remedy. And hypericum is for any kind of nerve damage. So all of these nerves, all these things have taken a hell of a beating during that labor. And so your hypericum, your vellus perennis, your calendula, your arnica, these are your go-tos the moment you've had a birth. So
Yes, and you're
regardless of
talking
what
about
kind.
taking those as oral drops or oral
Absolutely.
little tiny
Absolutely.
tablets. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I literally just put them in a line, and I took whichever one every hour. I just took whichever one I hadn't taken before, and then I moved it to the back, and then the next hour I took that one, and then I moved that one to that. So every hour you're taking one of these remedies for the first 2 or 3 days. And that really sets up the healing beautifully.
Fantastic results.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can just note that
Absolutely.
that's huge. It makes the women are just recovering so quickly.
Exactly.
That's
And then we come to,
yeah.
we're doing breastfeeding. There are so many remedies that help to bring in milk, help to regulate milk. So there are remedies that will just help make that easy. I remember my little girl, it's a long time ago now, but both of us developed candida. I had an outbreak of candida when she was
You're
just
talking
born.
about thrush baby. So the baby would have had it orally, and you would have had it on your nipples and areolas.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you're kind of feeding it to each other.
That's right.
Yeah.
I cannot even describe to you how painful it was to breastfeed. It was like 700 knives going into my back every time she latched. It was excruciating, but used homeopathy, and within 2 to 3 days, it was all back to normal. I mean, as she would latch, I would just cry because the pain was so terrible.
Yeah.
But I persevered on and got through it. So, there is so many things that you're not ill. You're not going to die from this, but this is important to get through.
And it's about the whole thing that homeopathy does is it sets up the body for the body to be able to do the healing that it's naturally meant to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like all the time, 24 hours a day, our body is constantly striving for homeostasis, which is that equilibrium. All day, every day, it's constantly trying to create that. And what we see as symptoms is that's the outward sign of the body trying to do things. And homeopathy simply just supports the body to do that. And I find that really interesting that you talk about the hypericum and the calendula post-birth. Some of the audience may realize or may not that there are creams and gels and lotions that you can get where it's the combination of the two, turned hypercal, so hypericum and calendula, the hypericum being a natural antiseptic and the calendula being the skin healing promoter. And I can tell you honestly, hand on heart, that I had never, when I was a case-loading midwife 24/7 on call, every single one of my women would be using hypercal on their perineum, if there was any kind of tears or sutures going on there, and never had a woman with a perineal infection ever, which is crazy, like crazy phenomenal. And I remember saying that to an obstetrician once, and they were just like what? Like how? How is that possible? And yeah, so it's some of the remedies are not just internal, they're also external, and amazing results.
Absolutely. And then I also, my birth with my son was at home, and you can't see that I'm an incredibly short individual. I'm not tall, and my husband is 6'3", and I mean it's crazy, really. Maybe they shouldn't have been allowed, but this was an incredibly big baby for my body. I should not have been able to deliver this baby naturally. It just shouldn't have been. 4 kilos and an enormous head, just enormous baby. And true to form, he got stuck long before I had enough time to dilate in order to be able to deliver him naturally. And had I been in any other circumstance, for sure, I would have been cesared because, if you don't have any other tools in your toolbox, you would have to do that. And fortunately, my homeopath was on call, and he just appeared at the moment my son got stuck, and he said he just got a message to come and help me. And he actually injected cinnamon, which is a homeopathic remedy, into my back, which stopped my cervix from becoming hard because my son kept pushing down to come out, but I wasn't dilated enough.
Yes.
And that cinnamon saved the day. It stopped it from, and so 4 hours later, I was able to be dilated enough to deliver him naturally at home. It was completely saved by him knowing what to do at that moment. So homeopathy can be incredibly, incredibly useful. And of course, there are other remedies that help to turn the baby, breech babies. There is lots that we can do. But when we come to that baby, once that baby is born, all the natural stages of that baby's development, there are going to be hiccups along the way. Yes. And baby's not ill, but there are hiccups. There are normal things that have to happen. And we just want to be able to make it sorry, my dog is barking. We just want to make it as comfortable as possible for mother and baby to get through those stages really quickly. And if you learn how to do this, it's quick. If your remedy is not working, it's not because there's a problem with the homeopathy, it's because you haven't diagnosed it properly. So sorry.
Now, I know that we don't use these maternity natural health webinars, and we try not to use them as a marketing advertising form of promoting of products and services so much. It really is more about sharing information, but in practical terms, because when you're looking at first aid, we can't go through all of that information in 45 minutes. It does take a little bit longer than that. So, and I know that you talk about your first aid course that for children. So I want to open the floor for you to do a little bit of self-promotion on this one and actually just explain a bit about the course and what you do, and because it's really the way to get that information. It's the best way is to actually do a little bit of training on it.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So it's a 6-week course. It's 2 hours a day, over 6 weeks. So it's once a week, and each week we go over a different circumstance that was going to come up. So we do fevers the 1 week. The next week we do colds and flus. The next week we do coughs. Coughs are really an interesting one because in our training, there's a fellow who can actually mimic all the different coughs, which is hilarious, I have to tell you.
And I'll just clarify, were you saying 2 hours a week or 2 hours a day? What was that?
Oh, yeah, so it's 2 hours a week. So we're doing
2 hours a week
one class.
Over 6 weeks. Yeah, so
exactly.
It's 12 hours, basically. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
So basically we're doing over 6 weeks, and then what you're doing in that time in between is you're starting to actually integrate the information. If I gave it to you all at once, it would be so much information overload that you'd actually come out feeling more confused.
Yes.
But because I've put it into little blocks, you can now say, well, okay, and then obviously because we're doing it on Zoom at the moment, parents can come and say, oh, this happened to my child this week, and I tried this, and this is what happened, and I can go, yes, and did you try that? And so we can start to actually have a conversation about one's children and how one's reacting and what's happening with them. But each week we're going to cover something else: dental issues, the teething issues, the colic issues, the runny tummies, and the constipation. This is something that these babies are going to have. And there's certain diarrheas, that come with teething. They're a particular color, they're a particular smell, there's, and if you know what you're doing, you give the remedy, it's all gone. Your child's becoming very capricious, very agitated. That's a particular remedy. Or very weepy and clingy and not wanting you to go anywhere. That's a particular remedy. So it's really teaching mums how to do this. The other thing actually that I do teach, which is a little bit out there, I know, is I teach all my mums to use muscle checking. Do you know what that is? Kinesiology.
Right. So yeah, I mean, this is where those other qualifications and training that you've had really come into play. And I love this because this is exactly what we're talking about when we use that term integrative. You know,
Exactly.
that it's not saying that everything's going to be cured by homeopathy. It's saying we use the homeopathy in conjunction with Alexander technique, in conjunction with, and it's getting that the biggest picture.
Holistic.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So please explain, some of that.
Okay.
To
So when you learn to muscle check, you can. The thing is that babies sometimes get sick, or actually mostly get sick in the middle of the night, when you can't call anybody. You can't call your homeopath and say, okay, this is what's going on, help me. You have to figure it out for yourself. And often when a baby is crying, you're in a panic situation. And now you've got your book and you're reading it and you're looking at the symptoms and you're reading it, but sometimes the remedies look very similar. So aconite and belladonna, both fever remedies, your baby is screaming, they look really similar. If you have learned to do muscle checking, your husband or partner can put their hand on the baby and you can use your husband as a surrogate and test which one of these remedies is right. It just makes life a million times easier. I didn't have this when my baby was little. And so we'd start with the aconite, and then that didn't do anything. Okay, that must be wrong. Then we'd go to the belladonna. Okay, that's right. But we could have shortcut that by just knowing which was the right remedy, because you are in panic and you're reading it. And I remember sitting there with my book. I mean, I had that mother and baby book. It was like my Bible. And I'd be sitting there with my husband and we'd go through it and he'd say, does that look right? And go, yeah, kind of. Yeah. And then go to the next one and go, yeah, okay. Which one? And there's no one to ask. And so if you learn how to muscle check, the body knows what's right for it.
And is that something that you teach through the course as well?
I do teach it.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
really important to learn that. And it is so dead easy to learn. I mean, truly, you don't need a 20-year course on it. Truly not. It's about practicing. And the more you practice, the better you get at it. But it's an essential skill. Because, I mean, I have to tell you that
useful one to add into that picture.
Well, absolutely. And I used it for years, and I've always used it. And in fact, I remember walking in the supermarket with my son, and he wanted me to buy him a bottle of Nutella. And I didn't want to say to him, no, that's bad for you. I said, well, let's see if your body likes that. So we muscle checked him in the middle of countdown, and he held the bottle of Nutella, and I muscle on his body said, no, didn't like that. And I said, well, your body doesn't like that. So we put it straight back. And it wasn't me telling him that he couldn't have it. His body was telling him that he couldn't have it. And so he was like, okay. He accepted it much better because his body said no. It wasn't me who said no.
Yes.
And to this day, he'll put out his hand and say, Ma, something's wrong. Please check me. Or if he's not well, he'll phone me and go, these are my symptoms. What do I take? And he's got a really big kit there at home because he lives away from me. And I can say to him, okay, this is where you start. And phone me in a couple of hours, tell me how you're doing, and we go from there.
Yeah.
So muscle checking I know it's the lazy man's way of doing things, but it is such a good shortcut. And
no lazy man about it. It's just, it's basically giving you, more information in your clinical picture of what's going on. And it just gives you, more guidance through it. Yeah. What would be just as I know that you explain this more in the the 12-hour course, and we can't realistically condense all of that in today, but to give an idea about how many remedies would somebody have in their basic sort of home first aid kit when we're talking about looking after a baby, say.
42 remedies is the best kit.
Right, there we go.
It is quite an expensive kit. So we start with 12 remedies because we just want the very basics. And what I've been doing with my course is that at the end of the course, the mums would say, for my child needs these 12 remedies. So it's not one kit that everybody gets. It's the 12 remedies that your child will need. And
that's fantastic.
well, because different children, we've had children of different ages, and so they're not in the teething, so they don't need the colic and the teething remedies. They want more of the flu cold remedies or the fever remedies, or that my child has problems with her tummy, let's do the tummy remedies. So we put those 12 remedies depending on who you are or what you want. But homeopathy is a thing that you grow at home, like you and I have done. I've got a cupboard full of remedies. Absolutely. And
so you start out with these remedies, and then over time you just accumulate more as different things have I will tell you this one story, because I think that it so illustrates homeopathy, and because I was leading up to having our first baby, I was always quite a hippie at heart. So I had I was an actual hippie there for quite a while, but so the kind of natural was kind of my mindset anyway. But I didn't know anything about homeopathy very much. I hadn't really used it, but of course now I've got a baby coming, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go down that track of what was done to me, and that was done, with the best parenting that they thought at the time, but I certainly don't want to go down the track of, using antibiotics for everything all the time. And so I that's where I started to learn. I think so often in the journey of motherhood, that's where we all start to learn new things that we didn't, things become more precious to us in a way. And so what happened was we were on holiday, and we had just arrived in a place in the middle of the North Island in New Zealand called Taupo, and our child was maybe 5 or 6 months old, and there was signs clearly the little one had become not looking very healthy, and I'm still a very new mum, so I'm like, okay, I'll go to the doctor and see what's going on. And the doctor goes, oh, and our child's coughing away, and he goes, oh, this little one's got bronchiolitis. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, here's a prescription for antibiotics. I'm like, okay, thank you. Go back, look up my book, get out my remedies, give bronchiolitis remedies, and hey presto, got, within quarter of an hour to an hour or so, all the symptoms are going overnight, and the child looking good. And then the next day, this little one is refusing to eat, and I'm like, oh, now what's going on? And you could tell again, Rick had become unwell. I'm like, well, oh, okay. So I get to, and now we're in a different city. We're now closer to you. We're in Tauranga, and go to a different doctor, and they go, oh, this child has tonsillitis. And I'm like, oh, okay, here's a prescription for tonsillitis. And I said, oh, well, yesterday this little one had bronchiolitis. And the doctor looks at me and goes, no, you crazy mother, that child has no signs of bronchiolitis. It could not have possibly had bronchiolitis the day before. This is what I could see in the eyes of this doctor. No, nutty mother, your child has tonsillitis. So go home, get the remedies out, treat for tonsillitis. Hey presto, everything's looking good. The next day we get back to Auckland, and now this little one's pulling on the ears, and I'm going, oh, now what's going on? Go to the doctor. Your child has an ear infection, otitis media. And I'm thinking, and I explained, oh, well, yes, Rick had tonsillitis yesterday and bronchiolitis the day before. And the doctor's like, no, there's no way that your child had those things. Anyway, so when I finally spoke to my homeopath, because I was very new at all of this, really, and I said, that's so crazy, 3 diseases in 3 days, or 3 illnesses in 3 days. What was I doing wrong? And the homeopath is, no, you were doing everything right, because the disease was traveling up. That's part of the process.
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
but of course the medical doctors thought I was nuts,
Oh, absolutely.
because there was no signs of bronchiolitis 24 hours later. There was no signs of tonsillitis 24 hours later. And I remember at that moment in time, that was kind of because my husband was with me, not at work, was with me, through those days of traveling on a little holiday. And that was like this moment in time when I knew that was his convincing,
Right.
and
Right.
from that moment on, which is 25 years ago, he was like, that's it. Like, this stuff works, man. This stuff really works. And anyway, I'm sorry. I just wanted to share that story because it's such an example of the incredible results that homeopathy can produce.
Well, not only that, but it explains how when you're doing an acute homeopathy, how you literally move through symptoms.
Yes.
And you can't use the same remedy. You've got to change remedies as you move through the symptoms. That's why you need the kit.
Yes. And that's why you need your book.
Well, yes. And also that's why you need some education, because this is not a chronic condition that's lasted the last 20 years and you're going to take one remedy for 3 times and see you in a month. That's not how acute works.
Yeah.
We're going to talk all the way through this. So a mum will call me and say, my child's got chickenpox. Great. I know what to do. Send me the pictures. I look at the pictures. Great. Send her the remedy. But actually, that's only the beginning. And it's a really an education, because that's not going to see you all the way through, because the things are going to change. And so as the child changes, we need to keep moving through the remedies until we get to the mop up, and we mop up, and then we're done. And it's so beautiful. It is such a beautiful experience. I mean, I have to say that there were times that my youngster had a knack of getting double pneumonia, the drop of a hat. And I do remember one time feeling so exasperated that I thought I had tried everything. And I thought, okay, I have to take him to the hospital now. And I put him in the car, and I'm driving to the hospital, and I'm crying because I know that they don't know what they're doing. Sorry. And I knew that they weren't going to do good things to him.
Not just the fact that they don't know what they're doing, but they have such limited tools.
Exactly.
So that's the thing. Like, what are they going to do? Well, they can give antibiotics. They can give some IV fluids. They could give you paracetamol. Like, what they have, they're restricted not only by knowledge but restricted by the tools.
Exactly. So I was crying on my way there, saying, I know what they're going to do. And 3/4 of the way there, I stop and I say, no, I can't do this. I have to go home and I have to start again. So I turn around and I go back home and I say, right, let's start again. Let's clear the decks. Let's look at the symptoms and start again. And we did. And we got him right. But it was, there are times that one feels you need support. And that's why it's so important to have the education and somebody on your team that you can phone and go, I'm exasperated. Please help me. I'm tired. I can't figure this out on my own anymore.
That's right. You do. And I mean, that's because that story that I just told, and I was seeing a doctor, then a doctor, then a doctor. And that was because I wasn't at that place of being confident, and I wasn't a midwife. I had no medical knowledge around me whatsoever.
Yeah.
I needed somebody to put a stethoscope, on this little baby's chest and go, that's bronchiolitis. Now, down the track, I could actually do that myself. That's not really rocket science. You stick it on, it sounds like rice bubble crackles. Well, there we go. But at that stage, or using, so it is a journey, isn't it, as us as parents, of ourselves getting confident. And that's where you got to that point. You're going, you know what? I know I can probably turn this around.
Yeah. I mean, and there was the other thing is that the people around you have to support you. My husband was very 100% with me. I think if he wasn't, it would have been really difficult.
Yes.
At one point, my son developed whooping cough,
Ah.
And my parents said,
Sounds terrible. It's the most awful cough, isn't it? You know, like it really
"Ghastly.
pulls your heartstrings type of cough
Oh, it's
in your
horrific."
baby. Yeah.
Exactly. And they said, "You have to now go and see a doctor." I'm like, okay. So off I go. And the doctor says, "Well, I've never seen whooping cough before. So call me when he gets pneumonia." Okay, well, that was money well spent. So I went home and I found a different homeopath and we got through it easily. But yeah, it was.
Yeah. It's not about denying children access to mainstream medical care. What we're talking about is just saying use it as the first cab off the rank.
Yes.
You know, so the baby's got a cough, okay, rather than the first thing you're doing is dashing down to the GP, and all they're going to do is probably give you some antibiotics. Rather than doing that, you know, just give yourself and the child a few hours, you know, maybe a day, or and you know, address it with homeopathy, address those symptoms, and chances are they're going to be recovering really well.
That's right. Really fast. Absolutely.
Oh, it's been so great talking with you, and I know that we didn't go into lots of specifics in the first aid, and that's really because it's just there is too much to know to try and squeeze it into, you know, 45 minutes here. But hopefully this is an inspiration for those watching of, you know, the potential of the incredible benefits and usefulness of homeopathy. But before we wind up, there must be some other things that you would like to go over or conclude with?
I think that I wanted just to touch on the other things that I do for pregnant mums, because the sound therapy is such an important and valuable thing to be doing when you're pregnant, because connecting with the baby and having that attachment is such an important experience to have for that baby going forward for the rest of its life. So
and
many
do you
of the
want to give
children.
a quick little overview about sound therapy and what that is?
Yeah, so we're using Mozart, and when baby's in utero, baby is listening to all the noises in utero, and it's very noisy in there. It's your digestion and your heartbeat. There's so many noises going on in your tummy. It's not a quiet place at all. I mean, if you ever put your ear to somebody's tummy, it's gurgling, and I mean, there are all kinds of noises going on there.
Yes, and although babies are born without their eyesight being 100% mature, their hearing is. In fact,
correct.
Their hearing is basically 100% in place, whereas by the time we're adults, we're starting to get a little deaf. Yeah, so I mean, their hearing is more acute than our hearing.
Correct. So the point is exactly right. And the hearing is fully developed by 16 weeks. And what happens is mother's voice travels down the spinal column, and the baby can hear that voice, and it comes in at a high frequency. And because it's at a different frequency to all the other visceral noises, the heartbeat, the digestion, baby pays attention to mother's voice. And so mother's voice really, because of the high frequencies, activate the brain and get the brain to start the development. And it's like the railroad starting to develop in the brain. Also, the vagus nerve goes from the right ear to all the organs in the body. So hearing doesn't only develop the brain, but it develops all the organs in the body. And that quality of the mother's voice tells the baby we're under stress, we're under threat, we're happy, we're relaxed, we're content. The timbre of mother's voice that is reaching the baby is telling the baby all about its environment and where it's going to be. So that is such an important time. So during the sound therapy, you're listening to Mozart, and we're not putting the headphones on the tummy because it has to go through the spinal column. So we're hearing through bone conduction and air conduction, so that the baby can hear the Mozart too. And the added high frequencies add to that enrichment of the brain development. And so the mums who've done the program, and two mums of mine did the program together and put their children in the same school when they were little, and they could see their children were vastly different to the other children. They learned quicker. Their vocabulary development was much better. Because their brain was ready for learning. So it's about preparing the baby for learning, but also very importantly is to create that connection with their baby, to make that attachment. I have done a lot of work with adopted children, because at one point in New Zealand, a lot of children came from Russia and they'd been left in their cots way too long.
Yes.
Without any human contact, without any attachment. And they continued that experience of not trusting people, of not being able to form relationships into their adult years. And it is something that we can do with sound therapy, is take people back to that intrauterine experience and kind of rebirth them, as it were, using the Mozart. So this is a really, really important thing that I can offer. And also Alexander technique is so useful because we have back problems and back pain. But more importantly, when you're breastfeeding, you want to learn how to use your head, neck, and back, and to not get a sore back while breastfeeding and a sore neck, because breastfeeding is quite a demanding thing on your body.
It is, and you really do. You certainly can get, particularly if you're not supporting the weight of that baby, and often you will see women, especially in the early days, where they're holding their baby for breastfeeding and they're using all their own neck and shoulder muscles and everything to hold this baby, and you just know they're going to be in trouble.
That's right.
And it's about surrounding themselves with so many pillows that they are not using strength to hold the baby in place.
Exactly. And I mean, also picking up children and changing them, all of these things create quite a strain on our own bodies, and carrying them. And yes, there are developments and we're carrying them better in the front, and but actually these things need to be learned, because our own bodies take quite a strain. Yes. So through the pregnancy, post-pregnancy, this is really useful to learn on how to use your body better. So that's the other little bit of advertising I'm putting out there.
Well, I mean, yes, it is talking about your services, but the point it's education about the fact that these things can really make such a difference.
Totally.
Look, it's been so great talking with you.
And you.
Nolene, it really is. And we just encourage all those mums to be, and to really be and particularly embracing, homeopathy as part of it, because it's not expensive as well. I mean, when you look at the remedies of things that you would buy over the counter, and generally, they're not expensive remedies, and they do last a long time.
Exactly.
So it's just about having that familiarity, and particularly for our healthcare professionals, to think about getting themselves educated in that area as well, because it's another tool in your toolbox. And I mean, I know that we haven't really spoken so much today about labor, but I as a caseloading midwife, I did a lot of births in primary care. So we're talking about in a birth center or at home. Probably about 40% of my births would be in primary care, and the amount of times where you'd have particularly a primip, so a first-time mum, where maybe she may have been already awake for 2 or 3 nights over latent labor, and she's had a really good, strong, active labor, and she's fully dilated, she's starting to push, and there's just this kind of exhaustion that comes in, and you can kind of see the contractions getting, not as strong, not as frequent, not as long, and we're like, we're so close to having this baby, and the last thing we want to be doing is an instrumental delivery of ventouse or forceps. We've gone so far, and honestly, the times when I would just use a little bit of birth aid mix, and hey presto, and 15 minutes later, 10 minutes later, the contractions are rocking along again, her energy's reinvigorated, and hey presto, we've got a baby.
Wow.
And I would go so far as to say that if the same labor was occurring in a hospital system, without easy access to ventouse and forceps, and without access to homeopathy, there would have been literally hundreds of more instrumentally delivered babies out of that cohort. It's miraculous. Sometimes it's absolute. And when homeopathy when it's not the right remedy, it does nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's amazing product. So I'm sorry, I don't usually contribute quite so much into the conversation, but you can see I'm passionate on this one. So I hope everybody watching has enjoyed today, and we need to sign off and we're over time. But look, again, I just wish everybody a wonderful rest of their week. We look forward to seeing you guys next week, and thank you so much, Nolene, and what you're doing for the world, because you're changing outcomes, and that's awesome stuff. So thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.